e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, g6, c3, a6, bishop c4, bishop g7, castle kingside, d6, h3, knight f6, rook e1, knight takes e4, bishop takes f7, check, king takes f7, rook takes e4, d5, rook e1, e4, knight h2, knight e5, d4, knight d3, rook e2, knight takes c1, queen takes c1, queen h4, knight d2, rook e8, knight df1, king g8, knight e3, bishop e6, queen d1, rook e7, rook c1, b5, b3, rook d8, a4, rook f7, a takes b5, a takes b5, rook a1, rook df8, queen d2, bishop h6, rook a6, bishop d7, queen e1, c6, rook a2, bishop f4, knight ef1, bishop d6, b4, queen g5, king h1, h5, queen d2, bishop f4, queen e1, bishop d6, queen d2, queen h4, queen e1, g5, rook a7, g4, g3, queen takes h3, queen d2, h4, queen g5, check, rook g7, queen takes h4, queen takes h4, g takes h4, bishop c8, rook takes g7, check, king takes g7, knight g3, rook h8, h5, bishop takes g3, f takes g3, rook takes h5, king g2, king f6, rook f2, check, king e7, knight f1, rook h8, knight e3, bishop d7, Rook A2. Rook F8. Rook A7. King D6. Rook A2. Rook F3. Rook E2. Bishop E6. Rook E1. King E7. Rook E2. Bishop F5. Rook E1. King F6. Rook E2. King G5. Rook E1. Bishop D7. Rook E2. Bishop C8. Rook E1. Bishop E6. Rook E2. King G6. Rook E1. Bishop D7. Rook E2. Bishop F5. Rook E1. King F7. Rook E2. King E7. Rook E1. Bishop D7. Rook E2. Rook F8. Rook A2. King D6. Rook A1. Bishop E6. Rook A2. King C7. Rook A1. Rook F3. Rook E1. King B7. Rook E2. Bishop D7. Rook E1. King B6. Rook E2. Bishop C8. Rook E1. Bishop D7. Rook E2. King B7. Rook E1. King B6.